Good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you on this very unique opportunity to interact with one of the most admired leaders that I've had the good fortune to work with. Gopal, what a pleasure to have you this evening on this particular program. And I genuinely meant that when I said you are one of the most admired leaders. So what I noticed about you, Gopal, over the three different assignments that I personally had the opportunity to partner with you and work with you, is your clarity of thought, is the sensitivity you give to all the stakeholders, and the humility and simplicity with which you conduct your life and your work. And at the same time, there is this tremendous intensity in you, which is palpable. So I have really enjoyed my work with you and interaction with you. So thank you for agreeing to do this, Gopal.
Thank you very much, Anil, for having me over here. I mean, I have really enjoyed working with you as well. So I think that you're a very, very wise person, and you've really helped our teams kind of come together and drive a very coherent, cohesive agenda. So thank you for all the work you've done for us.
Thank you, Gopal. So let me begin by asking you the first question, Gopal. Amongst all the things you have done in the last many years, what is that one occasion that you want to talk about when you and the team were at your happiest best, where you not only did some exceptional work, but that gave you the maximum happiness? So what would you like to recall? I'm sure there are many, but what would you like to begin talking
about? I think it's difficult to single out one thing, Anil. But what I would say is that, as I look back on my career and all the various things I've been involved in, I see a pattern which is almost like I would say a profound insight, and that is that when you're confronted with a crisis. By the way, the word crisis, the Chinese word for crisis, actually simultaneously means both danger and opportunity. When you're confronted with a crisis, which is both a danger and an opportunity, I think it's an opportunity, or it's a moment in time when you can grow, and you can grow professionally, and you can see your team growing. I speak for myself as also the people I worked with. So I believe that in life you go through your crucible moments, which is your low moments. And when you're going through those, they're not happy. You don't feel great. I mean, you're sometimes, you're always consumed by it. You're thinking about it. There could be moments of great stress. But in hindsight, I found that those are the moments when I have actually grown a lot. And so the example that I want to take is the last 3 years in the telecom industry, where we've been through brutal competitive intensity, where a market that was perhaps $40 to $45 billion got reduced to $25 billion. Revenues collapsed. 8 players went bust in dramatic circumstances. Companies went bankrupt. Jobs were lost. The number 2 and number 3 player merged. Cash became an issue. CapEx went through the roof as prices lowered and people started consuming more. And through all of this, I think we've come out of it. In hindsight, we've come out of it quite well. We entered with a market share of 30% odd, and we've come out at a lifetime high of close to 34% market share.
Wow.
Our non-mobile businesses, which is all the other businesses, our enterprise broadband, they've actually become much stronger. And we've built a very strong digital services platform within Airtel. Now, in hindsight, if I come back and, so coming back to your question, what made that possible? I think there are, 3 or 4 lessons that I learned. And I want to just call attention to that, because that is really what I would say has led to a lot of growth for everybody who's been involved in this. And you work with most of my team, or the leadership team, and you know some of them. I think the first is the ability to anticipate. One of the things that you find is that when you're going through a disruption, there is a lot of noise, and at the same time, there is some signals. And you have to be able to separate the noise from the signals. And so I would call anticipation really to separate the noise from the signals. And that means setting up processes which allows us allows you to actually pick up all the different patterns that are emerging. So, for example, we had, rooms across the country in all our units where people were talking to the sales teams, the vendors, the partners, the media broadcasters, just collecting information and saying, what are the patterns we're emerging? And every day that would be relayed back to the central team. And we would try and create the signal out of those patterns to see what you need to do as a business. Second lesson I've learned is that a lot depends on the tone that the leadership team sets. And our tone was not that of being a victim. Our tone was an optimistic tone. It was genuinely a tone where we believed this was a once in a lifetime opportunity as the market would consolidate and that we would come out of it strong. The third thing is that it's ultimately, Anil, about the customer. So your obsession has to be about the customer. What is it that you can do for the customer? So very early on, we figured that the real heart battle is going to be the battle for experience. And so how do you put experience at the cornerstone of really delivering that for the customer? Or how, as the customer is moving to digital channels, do you build strong digital services? And the fourth thing I would say is the culture, which is how do you create, for me personally, I derive my energy by traveling, meeting my frontline teams. I travel 2 days a week. And you can learn from your partners, you can learn from your frontline staff, you can learn from your retail manager in the store, or you can learn from your salesperson. And so in an organization, how do you flatten hierarchies to actually be far nimbler, far agile? And so I think the real answer to your question of when am I at my personal best is when I am focused on the input rather than the output. And all of these examples that I talked to you about is really about being focused on the input rather than the output.
And I personally witnessed that, Gopal, because I remember when we were facilitating your leadership retreat, and everyone was talking about the disruption caused by this biggest new entrant in the business, and the drop in prices and everything else. And everybody was in the industry was very shaken up by this new phenomena. And when I talked to each one of your senior leaders, and when I talked to you, you were aware of, okay, there is this big force, yes, we need to pay attention. But there was this steely resolve that I saw inside, and I said, this seems very unreal. That not that you are sort of underplaying the importance of this new big gorilla in the market, but there was a strong self-confidence that you had it in you and the team. I mean, every person in your team, man or woman, had this kind of self-confidence. Where did that come from? That requires something very special.
I think part of it is the DNA of Airtel. Airtel has come from nowhere. Airtel was started by Sunil Mittal, 25, 30 years ago, where, with hardly any money. And so in a way, we've come from nowhere, and we've had lots of knocks around the way. The second thing I would say is that we are in a very competitively intense market. But one of the things I have personally learned, Anil, is that, stress and your own attitude is about what goes on in your mind. And, I read this fantastic book. It's a really small book by a person called Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you've come across it.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, Man's Search for Meaning.
Search for Meaning, that's right.
And, he invented this whole thing of logotherapy. And the thing that it was a really tiny book, and for those of you who have not read it, it'd be really fascinating to read it because it's very easy read. It just takes you a couple of hours. He was in the concentration camp in Auschwitz, and the real question that struck me that he was asking was, what is it that is the difference between somebody who lives and somebody who dies in that concentration camp? Because everybody is being subjected to the same torture, the same humiliation, the same arduous conditions. And he says that the difference between the person who lived and the person who died was very simple. The person who lived had something to live for. He had a purpose, whether it was to go and meet his daughter, or whether it was to complete, some education that he hadn't finished yet, or whether it was to do something that he just wanted to do. And the largest number of deaths that happened happened 3 days before the war, when there was a rumor in Auschwitz that the war had ended. And the war didn't end the next day. And then it didn't end the day after that. And people lost hope and died. And on the third day, the war ended, and some people came out of it. And I think therefore, any stress, and this is of course extreme conditions. I'm giving you extreme conditions where it's life or death. But even in business, ultimately, stress is caused by what you imagine is going to happen. And if you can focus on the input and focus on the purpose that you're trying to serve as a team, as a business, as an individual, then I think the stress disappears, because you're then obsessed about the input. And I can tell you, I mean, the simple answer, I've seen that if as a leader, you're able to direct attention to input rather than outputs, then the politics disappears, the conversations become healthier, and the team gets more aligned. It helps when your backs are against the wall, because then the teams come together. But even under peace times, I found, Anil, that the single biggest driver for action is a leader's focus on inputs rather than outputs.
What a wonderful way of saying that. We always call that the lead factors and the lag factors and so on and so forth, to really take responsibility. Or as in the words of MS Dhoni, when you are focused on the right process, I think then the results in that sense are bound to happen if you do the right thing. So I have a follow-up question, Gopal, to this. Building a culture of this kind where you are connected with each other, you support one another to win, because nobody can do it individually. And yet, you have a high touch as well as high performance. Now, this is very rare in a team. It's not possible. Some teams are high touch. They play well. They care for each other. They have a good culture on the people side. But somewhere the feeling is that perhaps we are compromising on our output or results, or not challenging each other enough. On the other hand, there are others who are very brutally honest with each other, who challenge each other and have tough conversations, but they don't deeply care for one another. How do you manage to put both these together, high performance and high touch?
One of the things that, firstly, I believe that as a role of somebody leading a team, and in my role as the CEO of Airtel, one of my primary roles is to be the bridge and be the glue between different functions, different business units, and different agendas. Now, I think there is no substitute, Anil, for honest conversations. First and foremost, if you're clear about what needs to be done. And I think we spend a lot of time. We spend almost a month every year in December, almost assuming that all of us have been sacked. And, asking ourselves, therefore, without defensiveness, what is it that as a business we need to do to get better? Now, once you're aligned on the what, I found that invariably the challenge always is on the how. And the cracks that appear in the way people work is always on the how. It's never on the what. I mean, most organizations I've worked in will always have a big dream, a big vision, a clear strategy. I mean, you read any analyst report of any organization, most companies have a clear strategy. You can't fault a strategy. But the challenge is in how do you make it happen? And how do you make it happen is ultimately about people. And so one of the things that I found very useful is every 3 months, religiously now, and I wasn't doing this early on in my role here as in Airtel, but for the last 3 years, I do it religiously. Every 3 months, we go away as a leadership team and really try and find out and have honest conversations about how are we seeing each other? How are our teams seeing each other? Where do they see our cracks? That's one part. And the second part is what are we trying to get done? And through this, you have the room and the space to have honest conversations to say, what do we want to get done in the next 100 days? Because you know that in 100 days, you're going to come back and have another round of conversation. I think there is no substitute for having tough, frank conversations, especially when there are cracks that appear on the how. Nobody's got a bad intent, I've found in my career. It's just that you're seeing things from different perspectives. And so when you start discussing the how and saying, okay, this is how I see it. This is how you see it. What support do I need? How can I help you? How can you help me? What feedback do you have for me, and what feedback do I have for you? I find the environment becomes more conducive to people actually liking each other and getting you. I mean, everybody will not love each other, but you begin to realize how to become more effective as a team. And I think this is something that I've learned. And again, I must thank you on some of these exercises that you have done for us as well.
Thank you, Gopal. You know, R.R. Nair, our dear friend, common friend who was in Unilever, is also part of this webinar right now. And he was fondly remembering you from your Unilever days and saying even at that time, when you were a young leader in Unilever, it was apparent that you had some unique qualities, which people like him spotted at that time. That grooming in Unilever, to what extent has that helped you to be the kind of leader you are today? And to what extent have you deliberately unlearned something that you learned from levers? And I'm not saying that now this is not about levers, but this is about you. What is it that you had to unlearn in order to do what you're doing today?
You know, firstly, I have the greatest of regard for Mr. R.R. Nair. He was a legend in levers, and he was responsible for hiring me as a young summer trainee and then as a management trainee. So I owe my whole experience in Unilever to him. And he's an exceptionally wise man, and very perceptive man. I think I owe a lot to Hindustan Lever. Hindustan Lever is a unique organization which was able to attract some really, really outstanding talent and put them together in a business that was quite simple, selling soaps, detergents, toothpaste. It wasn't rocket science, but you had these really, really bright people coming in and actually being part of the team. And the osmosis that helped me learn from my bosses, from my peers, from my subordinates. I think it was an exceptional experience. And Hindustan Lever also had this amazing ability to actually expose you to very different contexts and different situations. So I did sales stints, I did marketing stints, I did general management stints, I ran the laundry category for Asia, I ran large businesses. So it was like, within the portfolio of businesses and geographies, you were exposed to different cultures, different environments, different problems. And that, I think, was the biggest grooming. You learned on the job through your bosses, through your subordinates, and through your peers. I think that was really what Hindustan Lever was about. I think for me, a lot of the, I would say, I'll pick on two things that I had to unlearn. The first is more about the harder side of it, which is the business side. And the second, I'll talk about the softer side. On the business side, I think, the big difference is that Unilever is a consumer goods company, and it's a branded consumer goods company. Now, in Unilever, the reason brands are important is because when you look at a soap or a detergent, you have to remind people, the involvement is very low. So you have to remind people constantly to buy the product or the brand. And so marketing is at the very heart of that organization. And marketing actually pretty much not runs or controls, but marketing is at the center of the entire agenda of the business, whether it is R&D, whether it is supply chain, whether it is sales, and so on and so forth. I think when you step out of Hindustan Lever, there are different types of businesses. I mean, take, for example, a business which is like telecom, where the relationship and the experience that you're able to deliver on a daily basis with customers is what determines your success. It's not necessarily just brand marketing. And so I think that was a big unlearning that I had to do. But the advantage was that I did spend 2 years in in Airtel between 2006 and 8, actually running marketing. And that was the unlearning process that I did. On the softer side, I think, Anil, I think that in my view, what does a job give you? I mean, for me, if I'm talking for myself, a job helps me learn more about myself and helps me grow as a person, as a leader, because it's only when you're aware of yourself, the impact you have, conquering your own ego, knowing that you're not always right, that you're able to get the best out of people. And this is a continuous journey. So I think coming out of Hindustan Lever, where you're in a bit of a cocooned environment, where you knew everybody, even if you behaved badly on a particular day, it was fine because you had a long history and a long relationship. It was like family, right? Because you've grown up together. I think, when you step out of a company like that, which is like almost like a business school, I think it's very important for every individual to realize that, and for me particularly, I think my biggest learning has been, and it happens every day, which is I just learn a little bit more about myself and the impact I have, and that just makes me more aware of that. And sometimes I slip, and then I think about it, and I again come back and try and get back on track. So this is really what I genuinely believe, that the role of a job is just to help me discover myself so that I can be more effective with the people I am given to lead.
Very, very interesting, Gopal. The literal meaning of the word educate, education, therefore, is to know yourself. And what you're saying is that work and workplaces are places to educate yourself and to gain self-knowledge. And self-knowledge and self-awareness is actually at the core of what we are now calling learning agility, which is such an important part of our responding to the world outside. So thank you for emphasizing that. I want to bring this back to your early schooling and education, actually, because I know that you are a product of the Rishi Valley School. And my children have not studied there, but I am fascinated by my early reading of the great master, J. Krishnamurti. He has a book called On Education, and where he said that, in fact, the most profound thing you teach young children in school is how to observe and how to listen. And this whole holistic education, which he talks about. So tell us about what Rishi Valley meant to you and what it did to you as a person.
Well, I went there when I was 9. So I was a young child, and my father was in a construction job. So he was a civil engineer building bridges in remote parts of Bihar and UPs, and we didn't have good schools there. So they made a big sacrifice and sent me to the school, which was reasonably expensive. I spent 9 years there. The first year I was kind of homesick and so on, like a little child would. Beautiful campus, spread over 400 to 500 acres, covered by hills all around. And this is in the middle of that. It's a valley there, very green at that time, and now it's become a little drier. We didn't have uniforms. We didn't have tests. We were not graded. So I've never, till my 10th standard, I never had a grade. It was always like good, fair, or poor, something like that. Or good, fair, actually, not even poor, good and fair. So half the class was good and half the class was fair. It was not competitive in the usual sense of the term, but it was very large number of teachers and very few students. So there were about 350, 360 students at the time in the school, from the 4th to the 12th. And there were perhaps about 90 to 100 teachers. So lots of teachers. So you got a lot of personal attention. You got to know them personally. I remember in my 11th and 12th, there were just 3 of us, or 4 of us actually, in the economics, commerce, accounts class. So you got a lot of personal attention from the teacher. And so I think most of the kids turned out well. They did different things. I mean, very eclectic things. One is an artist, like I was explaining to my very close friend. There are doctors, there are biologists and botanists. So there are different architects and so on. I think the biggest thing that it taught me, I would say, is to ask a lot of questions. And I think this is a school that, believed, or just J.T. Krishnamurti believed in the method of inquiry. He didn't have an answer for anybody. I mean, if you asked him a question, he would ask you back another question and make you think. And I think while, as a child growing up, I didn't understand a lot of what he said. Subsequently, I read a lot of what he's written. I think the one thing I would distill out is just it bred a lot of curiosity in a young mind. And I personally think that the determinant of potential in people, whether it's an organization or anywhere else, is really about being curious. I mean, you're not taught everything. You're not expected to know the answers. But if you ask the right questions, then I think, you're better placed.
What a wonderful gift to get early in life, Gopal. I think that's an absolutely wonderful gift. And as I once told you, I had a dear colleague called Alok Mathur, who used to work with us in Aishar. And then one day he just, he in fact also made me meet Jiddu Krishnamurti and in a dialogue session. And I was so sort of taken up by that exact moment when he came up to me one day and said, I have found my calling. I'm leaving this corporate career to go and become a school teacher in Rishi Valley. And, later on, I think he was one of the headmasters. So what a nice thing. I now want to ask you one more personal question before we come back to a professional side, which is your wonderful wife, whom I have only met once, but I heard so many amazing things about Irina from my daughter who works for McKinsey. To say she has this wonderful way of thinking, and she's quite an exceptional leader. And so how does that work out, and how do you sort of learn from each other, and how has that helped you in your journey as a leader?
Well, she and I met. We were classmates in business school at Calcutta, and she's a very wise person, and she's my best friend. So we discuss everything. It's great to have a sounding board, not just on business issues, but also on life. And I think part of the journey of me discovering more about myself is also the conversations that we have together. So she's got a lot of people who are her admirers, and I'm certainly one of them.
How wonderful! How very nice. Now let's come to the most obvious question everybody would be wanting to ask you, but this current crisis, and I know we don't have that ability to look at crystal ball, what will happen, and so on and so forth. But as a leader, what are you telling yourself and all your colleagues on how do you prepare your organization in the midst of this tremendous world-changing phenomena that we are part of? So how are you preparing yourself and your organization and working with your stakeholders to prepare for this situation?
One thing, I mean, on a lighter note, Anil, in a volatile, uncertain world, we have actually we are masters at this world. For the last 3.5 years, we've lived in such a world. So, we've got scars on our backs, and Airtel, all the people who work in Airtel. So this was just another bump along the road. So to that extent, I think it's been easier for us, perhaps, for two reasons. One is our business is more resilient, and secondly, for all the stuff that we've been through. But the way we are approaching it is actually in three parts. The first is really what I would call business continuity, where we are really focused on making sure that we are doing a service to the nation. We are keeping the nation connected at a time when this matters more than anything else, as people work from home. So our people are out on the ground, installing towers, repairing stuff, installing broadband connections, DTH connections. Our sales teams are out. So I think it's been a heroic effort just keeping that going. But the business continuity is also about how do we virtually work. So for example, we have a network operating center, which is the heart of our network. We manage the full network across the country. That's in Manesar, that has 1,500 people. And today it has only 15, and everybody else is working from home and managing it virtually. And it's been staggering to see how they've done that. We've also had to activate several alternate channels in a very agile way. So whether it's chemists, we tied up with Apollo, whether it is grocers, whether it's ATMs, our digital channels, for example. Today our business, almost 65% of our business goes through digital channels, which used to be about 30% pre-COVID. So all of this is what I would refer to as business continuity. And I think what we do is we do a daily call every day, 7 days a week. As a leadership team, we do a call between 12 and 1. I'm out there addressing the entire company every 10 days. A Zoom call like this where 10,000 people are logging in, just talking about the way we're seeing it in a very honest way. I mean, we don't have all the answers. So where there are no answers, we are quite open about saying we don't have the answers, but let's focus on what matters today, which is again coming back to the input. The second part is really simultaneously we've been looking at recovery. So as the districts turn green or as lockdown lifts, we have a district by district plan for 650 districts in India, where we have a recovery plan. The blueprints are ready, the toolkits are there. And so people are out there, we don't need to think. We just need to then go and act because all the thinking has been done. And the third part simultaneously, while all this is happening, is we have a separate team looking at retooling. Because through this crisis, we have learned there are many different things that we need to do to strip out waste, because there is a lot of waste in our company. For example, our call centers today are operating at 20% of capacities, but we're still able to address most complaints either on the app or on the IVR. So the question is, what is the role of call centers tomorrow? And some of that is really retooling, where we think we have an opportunity to remove inefficiency in the business and get much sharper. So those are the three ways we're looking at it, which is business continuity, recovery, and retooling.
Now, as you see this, just before we started the webinar, you were telling me about some exceptional stories. Some real heroes have emerged in your workforce who are doing something and going beyond and doing exceptional things every day to serve. Can you talk about just a few examples of that to show how some ordinary people are doing extraordinary things in these times?
You know, there are like, I think there are stories like every day. And we have, we have a portal where we put up thousands of stories over these last few weeks. We have, and there are three things that we have identified as behaviors for Airtel. By the way, our strategy for Airtel is called the GPS, which I think you're familiar with. GPS is like a navigational guide. But the behaviors that we want are three, which also are GPS. And the G is go green. And go green effectively means that when you onboard a customer for the first time, when you onboard a partner for the first time, when you onboard an employee for the first time, or when you put up a new site for the first time, it's got to be right. You've got to have the right induction, the right craftsmanship. Second is P, which is deliver promises, which means if you make a promise, you must keep it, or you must be honest about not making a promise and say, I can't do it. And the S is solve problems. Solve problems structurally so that it doesn't recur for the next customer. That is what GPS is. And within this umbrella, there are heroic stories. So let me give you a couple. There's a story of a gentleman in Bombay. And this is a story of, delivering promises. He wanted his connection set up. He was going to Haridwar on the following day. And he had a flight to catch at 6:30 in the morning. And this connection didn't work at about till 11 in the night. And this particular guy, our retail staff, our retail manager who was in touch with him till 11 in the night, it didn't work. Now, this guy's supposed to go home at 6:37 in the evening. At 11, it didn't work. So he said, what time is your flight? He said, my flight is at 6. He says, can you meet me at 4 in the morning? And I will have this set up. Nobody asked him to do it. He got it done, and the customer went away with the SIM. So, this is an example of, I told you I'm going to do it, and I moved heaven and earth, but I did it. Now, the immediate question is for us as a business, we ask ourselves, okay, how can you solve the problem so that it never happens again? Because obviously there was a fault in the chain. So that future, he doesn't need to wake up at 4 every morning. And this is something that should have happened seamlessly. So that's just one example. And there are thousands of stories like this, Anil, some of which are an individual, focused on an individual customer, and some of which actually impact million customers. For example, I'll give you an example of solving problems. So our team in Bombay listens to calls every day. Most of our teams do it. They listen to calls every day, and they found a very interesting thing where the customer's number was getting blocked for some reason. And they did not stop to actually address that issue for that particular customer, but they went back to find the root cause of why that was happening and found there was a bug in something in our core network, which was causing this problem. And by the way, the moment they solved it, 1.3 million customers had never had to face this problem again. So that was an example of solving a problem. So just plenty of stories like this. And we spend time actually talking about these stories and inspiring ourselves about these kind of stories.
Wonderful. Great. I think at this moment, I'll now turn to both the question answers and comments section. One question from Sachin Arora from the Aditya Birla Group. He says, how do you keep yourself calm and peaceful in the VUCA world with disruptions like COVID now and Geo in the immediate past?
I mean, firstly, I don't think I'm always calm and peaceful. I think I have my ups and downs. All of us do. I mean, all of us are human, and you have your stresses and so on. But I think that it is very important to really focus on the things you can control and not worry about the things that you can't. And I again come back to my favorite thing of really focusing on the inputs rather than the outputs, because what happens is, you get stressed when you start imagining what can happen, and then your mind starts playing tricks on creating all of these scenarios that frankly is just noise. So sometimes, what helps is, and each person can find what works for him. For example, one of the things I find is what helps me is actually having a conversation with this. I talked about this to my wife. On the other hand, she actually finds it very easy to write down on a piece of paper what's bothering me and then to clarify her own mind. So different people can find their different things, but I think it's important to be aware of the feelings that you have, because normally these stresses start with some feelings. So you feel upset, or you feel unsettled, or you feel angry, or you feel frustrated. And if you can have a conversation to say what's really bothering you and even that out, then I think your stress levels disappear. Exercise helps. You got to do that every day. Eat well. All of that goes without saying, but I think a lot of it is in the mind.
Thank you. Monica Tata from Europe. That's a wonderful, colleague who's been attending our webinars, and she talks about collaboration allows for a bump-free hero journey, as Joseph Campbell, the man who writes about myths, Joseph Campbell, the great, the great writer and thinker. So, do you see the benefits in business, impact to society, of enabling every stakeholder to participate, to contribute to the journey? He's talking about, all kinds of collaboration, including from the ecology and, Mother Earth and the planet.
I think, I read this wonderful quote by Jamshedji Tata, and when I visited Jamshedpur in Jharkhand, where he actually says the purpose of a business is to serve society. Society is one of the key stakeholders of the business, and so it's important that. And it was a very inspiring piece. I think from our perspective, I agree with you that I think you need to be aware of all the constituents in the business, the environment that you're serving, whether it's your customer, the society that you're a part of, and the shareholder that you're a part, and your employees, right? All of them need to be taken on board. Some of the small things that we do is we've started an initiative called Open Telco. This was a few years ago, where we actually enroll customers to tell us about the problems they were facing and help us in solving the problems, to get permissions to put up, for example, network sites. Sometimes in India, don't get permissions. And we got so many customers actually enrolling and helping us build the network, and helping us actually give us leads to put up sites in order to serve them better. So that's just an example in a digital world of enrolling customers to actually work and be part of the business, which is really to serve people and to connect people. We have one of the missions that we've taken is by 2025, we have published clear targets about the reduction in carbon, the reduction in our carbon footprint, the reduction in our energy footprint, and we're working with many solutions, including things like solar and so on and so forth, to actually do that. And that has been put out in the public domain. So those are the kind of things we're doing. Or, for example, look at the devastation that happened with the millions of migrants who were impacted during the COVID crisis. We've done our bit to actually give them free services. About 80 million customers were given free services for over 2 months during the first and the second lockdown by Airtel, to make sure that they continue to stay connected to their loved ones. And these are little gestures to help people and create that surplus, so that it's a symbiotic relationship between the people you serve and the business that you run.
Wonderful. Now, there's another important question from Deen Dayalan. Deen Dayalan is a person who has this large consulting company that works for the grassroots level people. And he talks about how empathy can be built by linking family essentials like groceries and medicine directly procured from farmer and pharma through digital enablement. So this will facilitate employees to get some essentials at lower cost. And so he's talking about this whole process of how Airtel could enable direct procurement from the farmer, and also from to enable all the essential supplies to people? Is there something that Airtel is talking about or thinking about?
One of the things that I have found is, and this is a lesson learned, with scars on my back in business, is to be really focused about the things that you can do and the things you can't do. Um, you know, from our perspective, I think we are in the telecommunications business, but at our core, we believe we have four strengths, and all our adjacencies that we're doing in the digital side leverage one of those four strengths. The first strength is that we have an invaluable amount of data of our customers. Who they're calling, when they're calling, how long they're calling, what data they're using, and so on and so forth. What content they're using, etc. They respect us with the privacy because we are very careful with this data, and we use this with great responsibility. The second big strength we have is payments. We are one of the few companies that can actually collect cash from customers through the million retailers that we have. Through our digital channels, we actually collect cash directly. The third strength that we have is distribution. We have access to 280 million customers, 16 million homes, millions of small enterprises, and over 2,000 large corporates. And the fourth strength we have is network, which is the location of our customers. So data, payments, distribution, and network. These are the four strengths. Everything that we want to do on the digital layer will build on one of those strengths. So for example, one of the things that we're doing is working with insurance companies to sell insurance policies. This leverages data and payments and distribution. This is a partnership. We have our own video platform, which again does this, which is Airtel Extreme. We have our music platform, Wink, which has over 60 million users, which does this. We have a large cybersecurity practice, which is required for our own needs, and we take it to our customers, our B2B customers. So when you think about our business, I think as long as we are true to those four strengths, we are very keen to partner with every single company who wants to partner with us. We make it very easy to partner with us, and that is really what our strategy is. So we want to play in a very large revenue pool and get a small share of that, because through partnerships, using these strengths, we can build meaningful revenue streams. That is really our strategy. And where we think it's very exciting, we may actually go and invest in and build on our own, like we've done with music or video.
Wonderful. Now, Shivani Bhatnagar, who is one of our young students in SOIL in the new batch, is asking a question that she was very intrigued by the rural outreach strategy, Operation Bharat, which was used by Unilevers at that time. And were you part of that? And if so, did you experience any major challenge in its implementation?
I think this is a project that was actually a very simple project. For some reason, I keep getting associated with this. I was a young brand manager when this happened. Fundamentally, the penetration of most of our brands in personal products, which was really soaps, toothpaste, skincare products, hair care, shampoos, and so on, at that time in 96, 97, was very low. And we wanted to go out into rural India and create and build the penetration and create the market. So it was a full story that was developed along with a package that put all of this together and allowed for us to go and sample at that stage almost 35 to 40 million rural homes, and in a way that created the market for many of our brands over time. It was not the only thing that did it, it was one of the things that did it. But I had the opportunity to lead that particular project at that time. And like this was, as I said, as a young brand manager, for some reason, I'm associated with it. But it was just one of the things that was done.
Okay. Hemang Kapoor, another one of the young students, is asking a question that since telecom industry is highly capital intensive, given the current pressure on capital and all the need for tomorrow 5G and all these kinds of different candidates for investments, how are you thinking about the capital intensivity and your ability to generate the capital and invest where you are required to, given the difficult situation of the market?
So I think we have a strong balance sheet, but more importantly, I think we have enough scale today to generate cash to meet all our capital requirements as well as our requirements to pay interest and so on and so forth. Having said that, the return on capital, which is one of the key measures that you look at in a business, in this industry or for us, is extremely low because pricing is extremely low. The return on capital in our business is in low single digits, 1 or 2%. So if you think about the money that you have, you could pretty much put it in a savings bank account and earn a better rate of return with much lower risk. So we take a lot of risk, but we're not getting adequate return. And the real reason for that is pricing that is unsustainably low because of competitive intensity. So I think one of the things that would be good for India is pricing becomes a little bit more rational. Our average revenue per user, for example, is about 150. It used to be 200, fell down to 100, and now it's about 150. This needs to get to 200 in the short term and ultimately to 300. You'll still be able to serve a lot of the poorer customers who can pay you maybe less than 100. But to get great services, to get the investments that are required to put out massive networks, build 5G networks, you need good return on capital and you need the right level of average revenue per user, which comes back to pricing. So I think that is something that still needs to be done.
One of my former colleagues from Aisha, Rakesh Jinti, who is the president of SOS, Children's Village, that large not-for-profit organization, he says telecom has become an extremely competitive sector. There have been huge consolidation, and at the same time, a new player has totally changed the landscape. The business itself is changing from pure telecom to a communication platform integrating with various businesses. So what's your view about the future of the sector and what shape it is likely to take in the future?
I think it's a very good question. And like I said, I think at one level, the backbone of the economy will finally be about telecom networks and telecom networks which allow you to actually provide high-speed data and high-speed connectivity, because everything that is conceivable over the next 5, 10 years, 20 years will really be about sitting on this core bedrock of a solid network. But the real question is, what can you do with that pipe on top of that network? And this is where I came to the, I talked about the 4 strengths that we believe we have, which is data, payments, distribution, and network. And using those 4 assets, the question is, what can you do to build new businesses and new revenue streams? One of the beliefs that we have as a business is that this is a game of partnerships, and we must partner with as many companies as we can. So we have something called TEAM in our company. TEAM is an acronym, TEAM. And this is really what drives our philosophy. And this is all digital, it's all done digitally. So T is for transparent commercials. If you have many, many partners, you want your commercials to be really transparent because you don't want the partner to ever feel that the commercials are not right. E is for easy integration into our platform. Everything is through APIs. We allow very easy integration, and most of our partners can be onboarded onto our platforms literally within hours. A is for accelerating the adoption. Because once a partner has come, for example, if HDFC is tied up with us on selling insurance policies, they want to sell many policies. They don't want to sell just 1 or 2. So how do you accelerate the adoption for them, which means how do you enable discovery and so on? And M is then for mutual growth. All of this is done digitally. And this leverages those 4 strengths I talked about. So I think the future of telecom, as I see it, the underlying pipe will remain. On top of that, how can you leverage this pipe to become a much smarter pipe to build an array of businesses, either on your own, where you have the capability, in some cases we don't, or through partnerships, where you partner with the world's best and bring those services to customers and then make a small part of a very large revenue pool.
Arvind Kumar is asking a question. How do you find the role of your competitors like Jio? How is it helping you to do better in your own journey? How is competition actually helping you in terms of what you do for your stakeholders?
I think competition is, I genuinely believe, at least in telecom as Airtel, we are children of competition. I mean, we have been in a competitive market for the last 25 years. And I think competition keeps you on your toes and it really makes you more agile. I mean, one of the choices we had when, disruption happened in telecom where, a new entrant came in with a deep-pocketed entrant with a large balance sheet and built a really big network and kind of disrupted the market with free services almost for 8-9 months. We had two choices. One choice was to feel like the world had ended, that we had become victims, that we were kind of in a deep hole. And the other choice was to use it as a burning platform to actually make the change that was required, because the opportunity was a once in a lifetime opportunity to transform Airtel into being a stronger digital services player and to come out of this with stronger market shares on the pipe. And I can tell you, and Anil has seen this at close quarters in our own teams. I can tell you that we chose the second path, and it was not just an intellectual thing. It was a visceral belief, and it was a visceral belief that translated all the way down to everybody. And we had to put some changes also in the way that we operated. For example, we have 18 operating units in the country, and historically every operating unit has been measured on revenue, on margin, or on profit and market share. What we said is, when services are free, you don't know what your revenue is going to be. You don't know what your margin is going to be, because if your revenue falls, your margin is going to fall. So what is the value in giving somebody a target of saying, you're going to decline by 10% or 20% or 40%? So we took away the revenue target for all our teams. We took away the profitability target, and we focused only on two things which you could control. One is your cost, and the second is your market share. Market share, which is the barometer of whether customers love you, and cost as to how efficiently you're able to drive that. And those were the only two measures that we had for 3 years. Now we've come back to our usual measures. And it was a bold call to take, but it was the right call to take, because you don't want the teams down the line feeling that they're losing. You want the teams to feel that they're winning. And that was very important, that you have the right metrics as well to manage that energy.
Ravi Sharma, one of my former colleagues, is asking this question. He's a practicing consultant. In a work from home scenario, when difference in efforts from people can be really stark, with some stretching themselves and others not visible at all, how would you show fairness in rewarding and recognition when in this work from home situation? What are the challenges you perceive, and how do you plan to deal with these challenges?
I think this is an excellent question. I think the work from home has truly taught me a number of things. One, as he's saying, it has shown some people actually going and doing an exceptional job, going well beyond the call of duty, and others kind of struggling. It's partly to do with their jobs, partly to do with the drive, and so on and so forth. The second thing that I have learned is that it has made the organization far flatter. I do a Zoom call with 300 leaders in the company, and I find that I'm able to reach all the 300 people and have a dialogue with them, which is like unusual. And then I ask myself, why didn't I think of this earlier? Why did we have to wait for COVID to come to actually have this kind of virtual dialogue with the leadership team? And I think a flatter organization means that you have information traveling up and down very fast, and so you're able to process it and respond with great agility. The second thing is that great ideas then bubble up from all parts of the organization. I mean, we do a Zoom call much like this with all 13,000 people once in 12 days. And it's fascinating to see the 400, 500 questions that come up. And, some of those questions really make you think. And some of those questions actually spark off ideas. And I think this is the other part, which is that you realize how, just through the process of dialogue, you can actually unleash so much more energy. And of course, have the right kind of motivation at a time like this. And finally, I think you have to be a little bit more sensitive about how you work, because you're now intruding into people's homes. Sometimes a pressure cooker is going off, or a child is screaming in the distance, or a dog is barking, and it's okay. And we take it lightly and joke about it, saying but never get stressed about it. And I think this is something that I've constantly had to talk to people, my own teams across the company, to say, be relaxed about this, because this is the new way of life if you're working from home.
Thank you. Ashok Ramchandran, the president of the Aditya Birla Group, who looks after human resources, He says, what's been your dilemmas around the team and the people agenda as you are building the business and preparing it for the future?
Ashok is a good friend, and I have great regard for him. I think it is, it's. I think to me the biggest. So let me start with one of the mistakes that I made, and this was, perhaps the shift to actually becoming a stronger digital services provider. Really like building a lot of our digital capabilities. We began about 2 years ago. And I believe that it should have started even before. We made an attempt about 4 to 5 years ago, but we put it at the periphery of the business. 2.5 years ago, we have put it at the core of the business, answering one of 3 questions. Are you able to acquire more customers? Are you able to hold on to them for longer and create greater lifetime value? Are you able to strip out inefficiencies? One of those 3 questions need to be answered, and therefore the digital agenda is at its core. So Ashok, to your question, I think the capacity of the organization to understand how the world is moving, and the capacity of different people in the organization to understand how the world is moving, upskill themselves, and be relevant for a changing world where customers are changing far more rapidly than what businesses are changing, I think is the biggest challenge. Some people are curious by nature and learn and embrace that and become comfortable with it. Others are not. And when they are not, then they find they start getting more and more irrelevant over a period of time. And I think the one thing I would say is the one determinant of resilience beyond performance is also about curiosity.
Wonderful. One of my colleagues from Aisha, who headed HR for Hindustan Times and now is an independent consultant, Mala Bali, she says, on judgment and decision making, could you share some of the paradoxes that you are living and how do these play out?
So I'll just repeat that question, Anil.
Share some of the paradoxes that you are living in terms of decision making, where you have to do this and that rather than this versus that.
Okay. No, I think that many of the choices sometimes that, and I have seen this in my career, and I've seen this even in, sometimes in Hindustan Lever as well, where there have been sometimes, dilemmas posed, which are almost false choices. Do you get, should you go for revenue growth or should you go for profitability? Now, I mean, we're not talking about extreme positions, but every business must do both. And you've got to manage that in that context. And you have to make the wise choices to actually do it, so that you balance both. Are you focused on the short term? Are you focused on the long term? You have to be focused on both. The next 3 months matter. The next 3 years also matter. And you have to have different horizons to look at those 2 problems, and perhaps have 2 different teams looking at those 2 different things. So I think some of these paradoxes sometimes are, I would say, false choices. And I found good leaders are able to balance these paradoxes and make a sensible decision. Second thing is, I would say, as all of us as leaders have to be comfortable with saying, I was wrong and that decision was wrong, and change it. You can't be stuck on something that it's not working. And the faster you're able to do it, the more you're able to listen and understand what's really going on at the ground and how what you're doing has impacted or is actually getting translated into results. That's a quality that's a priceless quality. So the humility to make a change and say, I was sorry, I'm sorry, I was wrong, let's change this, I found actually draws people more to you as a leader than anything else. It's not seen as a sign of weakness. Conversely, it's seen as a sign of strength.
Thank you, Gopal. Gopal, what a joy it has been personally for me to experience your leadership in this 1 hour. And there are 3 things I want to summarize as my learning from you. One is curiosity. That's the source of all new beginnings. Second, think through, connect all the dots, but make your strategy extremely simple so that it comes alive in the hearts and minds of everybody. Like the GPS acronym that you have, everybody will remember what they are required to do. 3, never hesitate to that you have made a mistake, and encourage people to learn from the mistakes. Like in this conversation, there are 3 times today when you talked about how you made a mistake and how you could have done something better. So learn from that failure, and encourage everybody finally to remember that the best version of themselves shows up when they have a particular purpose. In the search for meaning of Victor that you talked about, his book, that when there is purpose, it gives you extraordinary talent and makes you a far bigger leader than what you ever thought you were capable of. So thank you very much, Gopal, for this wonderful 1 hour with us. And thank you for being part of this series.
Thank you. Thank you, Anil. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.